Chapter 26. Treadon Nelson. Ellie stood outside the room where she usually tutored him. Her head was down, her focus on her phone as she typed out a text. "What's going on?" Treadon asked. He could tell she was going to cancel, but he had a big test. Between his grades and his injured arm, Treadon was worried he wouldn't be able to get an offer. He wouldn't be able to help his mom. "Sorry," Ellie said. "I have to cancel today. I just got a call from Pat, and she got called into work. I have to go watch the kids. Can I help?" The words slipped out before he could pull them back. He tried to cover the fact that he'd read something different, that she needed a different kind of help, but he wasn't sure what it was. I have a test tomorrow, and I'm still a little shaky on the concepts. Maybe I could come help you with the kids, and then you tutor me at your house." It sounded like a lame excuse, but for some reason, she was considering it. She played with a thin chain around her neck. "It's not exactly a good environment for studying." "I'll take the risk," Treadon said, gesturing for her to walk in front of him. She nodded with her eyebrows raised. "You better ace that test, and then I want a 5-star review for my tutoring services." 5.5. Treadon followed her out to the parking lot. She led him to a small green gremlin. Dents, dings, and scratches marred most of the exterior. She manually unlocked the driver's side door and then reached across to unlock his side. He turned to put his bag in the back, but felt the tug on his stitches and settled with his bag on his lap. He had to grit his teeth to pull the seatbelt over his shoulder and click it into place. Ellie kept both hands on the steering wheel. She hadn't started the car. Her back was rigid, and she blinked several times like she was restarting a conversation in her mind. "Do you want me to get out?" Treadon put his hand on the door handle. "No." The response was immediate. "Truth." "I'm not sure I'm doing the right thing. I'm afraid I'm putting other people in danger." "The people at lunch who can notice you now? Is it because you helped them?" "Not exactly, but it is nice to have people to sit with at lunch." She closed her eyes. "I just don't want to be the reason any of them get hurt." "Maybe my mom's friend could help. He helps save people in bad situations. Maybe not people exactly like you." "Like me?" She took her hands off the steering wheel and turned to glare at him. "You know, a descendant. An angel." Treadon tried to shrug like it was no big deal, but his stitches pulled tight. "But he might have a safe place for you to help you hide from whatever you're running from." "You haven't told him? You haven't told anyone, right?" Ellie was alert, looking at him, boring into him with those dark brown eyes. No. Treadon shook his hands in the air. "I promise, no one else knows." She let out a sigh of relief. "Thank you for the offer, but he can't help me. Sometimes I'm not even sure I need help." She paused and looked at him again, this time with something else in her eyes. "Thank you. It is nice to have one person who believes." She started the car and drove in silence. Treadon had to look away as the fear gripped him, stole his breath. He tried to breathe through the panic of being in a moving vehicle, even at normal speeds. He was grateful when they pulled into the driveway of a small home, a couple blocks from the school. It was a clean neighborhood, a few flags on flagpoles, flower gardens, and trimmed lawns. Ellie smiled at him as she shut off the car. "Are you ready for this?" "For what?" "Pat and her husband have several foster kids. It's a good home, but there's always a little bit of chaos." "I was born ready." She smiled and led him up to the front porch. When she opened the door, Treadon was met with the ear-splitting wail of something that sounded like a foghorn yelling from another room, and the shatter of a plate being dropped on the floor. Ellie shrugged as she shut the door. 2 small bodies piled into the entryway to pounce on Ellie with hugs and kisses. A third person, a boy that looked to be about 12, hung back, almost like he could hide in the shadows of the hallway. A middle-aged woman came around the corner, a crying baby in her arms. She had silver roots beneath her brown hair that was pulled back into a ponytail. Several strands had escaped, swaying freely with every bob of her head. She wore a pantsuit with dress shoes, and a large purse hung over her shoulder. "Ellie, thank goodness." She handed the baby over to Ellie. "I came as soon as I could," Ellie said. "Treadon, this is Pat Grayson. Pat, this is Treadon." Ellie made a quick introduction over the howling baby. "How is Nolan?" Pat wiped a finger across her eye, quick and subtle, like she could hide the tear that had almost escaped. "Same. He hasn't spoken, and I had to adjust his oxygen level today." "I'll check in on him, too," Ellie said, shifting the baby to one arm as it wailed. "I've got to run," Pat said. "Thank you so much, and it was so nice to meet you." She sent Treadon a wave as she slipped out the door. The 2 boys circled Treadon. The first one pulled on his sleeve. "I'm Foster." He had short hair and a freckled nose, intelligent eyes that held plenty of mischief. The second boy was almost identical in appearance, but he kept his distance. "I'm Mike Jenkins." "Hi," Treadon smiled. "I'm Treadon. I'm a friend of Ellie's from school." "You're really tall," said Foster, leaning his head way back as if to prove his point. "Are you a giant?" Mike pushed his brother back. "He's not a giant, he's just really old." The boys were practically yelling to be heard over the crying baby Ellie bounced in her arms. "Everyone to the kitchen," Ellie said, tugging Foster away from Treadon with one hand. The baby only wailed louder. Ellie closed her eyes for a moment. She pulled the baby closer and put a finger to her cheek. The crying slowly subsided until the baby was taking small gasps of air. Treadon couldn't pull his eyes away from Ellie. He knew she could feel his eyes on her, but she kept her focus on the baby. An angel. A girl descended from angels. It was unreal. Unbelievable. And yet, he believed. He believed that there was a world just beyond his knowledge, and she was the key to understanding it. Ellie stepped down the hall, bouncing the now calm baby in her arms. Mike and Foster followed close behind. She stuck her head into a small room off the side of the entry. Treadon could make out some medical equipment and a man on a bed hooked up to some tubes. "Who is that?" Treadon asked. "That's Pat's husband," Ellie answered. "He had an accident at work and hit his head. They think he may have permanent brain damage, but Pat is praying for a full recovery. She doesn't want to lose the kids, but she's struggling to make ends meet right now. I do what I can to help out." Treadon paused outside the door. He tried to read more behind Ellie's words. "Can't you help him? I mean, the way you did Rachel?" Ellie looked down. "It's brain damage. I can't fix the mind. It's too complicated. I won't do that again." She shut the door too quickly, shaking her head. There was more behind what she was saying, but it was buried beneath an avalanche of pain. Regret. "I'm sorry," Treadon said. "Come on." She waved her hand away. Like emotions as deep as the ocean could be ignored, like a gnat. She went around the corner with the twins, leaving Treadon in the hall with the tall, skinny boy. "What's your name?" Treadon asked him. The boy stared at him through dark eyes, shadowed with circles. His shirt hung loosely on his shoulder, collarbone protruding from where the stretched-out neck of the shirt exposed his upper shoulder. He wasn't the kind of skinny you see when a kid hits a growth spurt. He looked as if he'd been denied too many meals. His hair was shaggy and unkempt. Treadon met the boy's glare and tried to get a read on what he was thinking. There was a single emotion, with no words behind it. Distrust. The boy's face held a firm determination that no matter what physical pain was inflicted on him, his emotions lay dormant, untouchable, protected. "I see you've met Jake." Ellie led Jake to the kitchen and Treadon followed. Dinner was a blur of spaghetti, sauce, and the twins' voices. After dinner, Ellie got the kids ready for bed and Treadon stood in the doorway, watching. "Can Treadon tell the story?" Foster asked. "I don't know if he can tell a good story," Ellie said, a challenge in her voice. "I think I can handle it." Treadon stepped into the room and took Ellie's place on a stool. "Turn the lights off when you're done. I'll get the table cleaned off so we can study." Treadon started. "Once there was this awesome football player." "No." Mike rolled his eyes and bent his head back. "You have to start with once upon a time," he said, punching his fist into his bed. "Okay, once upon a time, there was a really good-looking football star. He saw a girl. I want him to fight dragons." Foster sat up, pushing his covers off. "I want him to be a ninja." Mike punched both fists in the air. Okay, only if you lay back down." He helped Foster pull his covers back up. "Once upon a time, there was a great ninja dragon fighter, and he had to rescue a princess. He jumped in an awesome car and drove to the dragon's cave." "What if the princess doesn't want to be rescued?" Mike asked. "Why wouldn't the princess want to be rescued?" Treadon couldn't help the question. "Lots of reasons. She can probably take care of the dragon herself. Or she doesn't want the knight to get killed. Or she broke the law and the dragon is keeping her in jail like my dad." Both boys had risen to their knees, out of their covers again. This was harder than he thought. He folded his arms. "Do you guys want me to tell the story or not?" We want a story. "Lay down." They grumbled, but finally got their heads back on their pillows. "A ninja went and fought a dragon. The princess came to help him. She was better with a sword. They rescued everyone from the prison because they all promised to be good and go to bed. The end." "Ellie was right," Foster said, glaring at Treadon. "Uh-huh. Bad story." Mike agreed. Well, go to sleep before the dragon comes back. Treadon stood up and shut off the light. He couldn't help glancing back as the two boys rolled over. Why wouldn't a princess want to be rescued? The question was left hanging in the air, unanswered. He went back into the living room and sat down next to Ellie. He checked his phone. It's pretty late, he said to her. You don't have to do this. Ellie opened her mouth just as the tall, skinny boy walked back into the room. She jumped up. Jake, are you still hungry? Jake shook his head, his brooding eyes scanning the room. Ellie set a plate of spaghetti in front of him. He sat down at the table but didn't move to eat. Why doesn't he talk? Treadon asked. He's had a very difficult life. A part of him shut down due to abuse. Ellie looked at Treadon. He leaned closer to her. The set of her jaw, the crease in her eyebrow, lines near her eyes, all spoke of a deep pain. He felt lost in her eyes, a swirl of sorrow, guilt, and loneliness. Ellie pulled back and raised her palm between them. Stop. Jake jumped from the table and reared over Treadon, a small growl coming from his throat. He pushed himself between Treadon and Ellie. Oh no. Ellie stood. Jake, it's okay, he's a friend. He wasn't hurting me. Everything seemed frozen in time as Jake's eyes bored into Treadon. Jake refused to look at Ellie. Let's get you to bed, Ellie said. Everything is okay. She touched Jake lightly on the shoulder. Jake's arm jerked up, catching Ellie across her cheek. His whole body shuddered. He grabbed his head in both hands and grunted as he doubled over. He looked at Treadon with tortured eyes and ran from the room. Ellie stood, stunned, her hand over her cheek where Jake had slapped her. Are you okay? Treadon wanted to reach out and take her fingers away from her cheek, but she looked as wound up as Jake had been. He kept his hands down by his side. He was protecting me. Ellie sucked in a breath and blinked back tears. I've been telling him about descendants and their guardians. He must have taken it to heart, thought he could protect me like he was my guardian. Descendants and guardians? Treadon asked. He'd seen her working miracles, but was only just beginning to comprehend what she could do, what she really was. Ellie looked away. Descendants choose someone to be their companion, to help fight the evil in the world, so that they are never alone. She looked out the window, her gaze far away, a deep line of sorrow etched into her forehead. Treadon reached out to her, unable to hold it back, but he chose the wrong arm. His shoulder, tight from sitting so still, protested at the movement with an intense wave of pain. He grunted and grabbed his shoulder. You're hurt. It's nothing. We got in an accident this weekend. I can feel it. Your pain. Her eyes were pleading. Let me do one thing right today. I can't fix Pat's husband. I can't help Jake, but I can do this one thing. Treadon hesitated. He wanted to help her. He wanted to take her pain away. But she was leaning toward him, begging him with her eyes. He couldn't say no. He nodded and lifted his shirt up over his head, exposing his torso and the stitched gash along his shoulder and chest. She reached up and traced her finger around the red, irritated stitches that stretched across the center of his bruise. That looks like it hurt. Treadon blushed as she examined his chest. No need to blush. It's not that impressive. Her small smile and slight dip of her head told Treadon she wasn't that unimpressed either. If you heal this, I'll be able to find you at lunch with your other fans. Are you sure you want that? Her finger was cool and hot at the same time. It sent a burst of cold that went straight to his bone and then spread from the center outward. He let out a sigh of relief. Her hand spread out and she leaned into him. I couldn't stop you from finding me at lunch anyway. The pain in his shoulder was gone. He could move. He could play football again. The relief was overwhelming. He put his own hand over hers. Go out with me. She raised an eyebrow as she looked up at him. I don't make long-term commitments. One date. Come out with me Wednesday night. I'll take you to dinner. Restaurants make me nervous. Okay, I'll take you somewhere else. Somewhere beautiful. Why Wednesday? We have an away game this weekend. State championships. And now, thanks to you, we have a chance. We leave Thursday morning. She paused and then pulled her hand away. I'll pick you up at 5. Treadon held his breath. The pain in his shoulder was gone, but his pull toward her felt like a rubber band that only she could snap. Ellie let out a breath. Okay, it's just one time. No promises. No expectations. The corner of her mouth lifted as she ducked her head. You still have to pass your test tomorrow, so we better study.